everyone. Welcome to the podcast. My name is Becky Caldwell, and I'm your host. I am an executive coach for nonprofit and mission-driven leaders, and I also serve as the actual executive director of the Virginia Highlands Festival in Abingdon, Virginia. Couple of quick announcements. Hey, support the podcast on Patreon. Also, if you feel stuck in your job, consider executive coaching. I can help you unstick yourself. That's it. That's all I'm going to say about that, because I'm freshly back from the Create Virginia conference where I presented, and different from like if you attend a conference. Well, actually, I think probably even if you do attend a conference, but especially if you present at a conference, it can be a draining experience, not in a bad way. Draining is never like a great thing, but it can be, you're just depleted because you put it all out for your session attendees. And then you come back and you're like, whew, I am tired. But I wanted to share this conference with my audience for a few reasons. Even though the conference was for artists and creatives. So artists of all kinds, writers, musicians, performers, painters, crafters. I'm sure I've left something out, but graphic designers. Even though it was for creatives, when I do these event recaps, it's so that you can take what I've experienced and apply what you like to your own conference that might be coming up, or your own meetings and events. And this gives me a chance to share with you a little bit of what I learned at the thing that I was at. And I think it can apply to a lot of different situations. So, we're not as different as we think, right? And that's why I'm going to chat with you about this. So Create Virginia was put on by a few different entities that came together to make this happen. And what I loved about who was putting this on was that it was a combination of economic development and arts organizations. So things like Opportunity Lynchburg, which is the Economic Development Authority in Lynchburg, Virginia, the Virginia Small Business Development Center, and then the Academy Center of the Arts, the Chamber of Commerce. There was like a bank and a legal organization, and an art space that's in downtown Lynchburg. So these entities all understand how important creativity and the arts are to economic development. I really appreciated that. The night before the conference, so the conference was on a Saturday all day. And the night before, there was an opening reception at Riverview's Art Space. And Riverview's Art Space was the pioneer organization in downtown Lynchburg's revitalization. So they converted a space, an unused space. I don't know if it was a factory or a warehouse. I want to say it was a shoe factory, but that could be the Academy Center of the Arts that was a shoe factory. Anyway. That's irrelevant. But it's they converted the first couple of floors are galleries, like public galleries, and then a floor of artist studio space, and then the upper floors of the building are residential. So they have a mixed use building that drew people downtown. They've been open for I think 5 years now, and maybe longer. No, 5 years. And that, since they moved in, so many cool little businesses have sprung up. So restaurants and coffee shops, and the Academy Center of the Arts is a really cool venue, multi-use, multi-space venue with theaters and art studios, like classroom space, gallery space. It's a really, really cool use of that building, or multiple buildings, actually. So that's where all the sessions took place. And the opening session was Michelle Anderson from Springboard for the Arts, which is located in Minnesota. She is her office is in Fergus Falls, I think is the name of it, Fergus Falls. And the other office is in St. Paul. And her whole thing was about using creative people power to revitalize rural communities. She said rural places are places of wild possibility. I love that. And it's so true. I mean, in an urban environment, there's so much regulation because of the density of people. Like there has to be. In a rural town, I mean, you can pretty much do whatever you want because you live next door to the mayor or the chief of police. I mean, like there, there are definite advantages if you're a rebel tendency like I am. There are definite advantages to being in a rural community. She also said community is an activity, not just a place. Okay, just pause on that, or maybe like rewind the little 10 second, hit the little 10-second rewind and hear that again. Community is an activity, not just a place. So cool, right? That is something that applies to all of us. And look, take that and use it in your next board meeting, all right? Or your next funder presentation or major donor lunch. Take that and use it. Community is an activity, not just a place. We are more than our buildings. We are more than our location. A community does, right? I think there's a book, Love Does, right? So community is an activity. Loved it. I am hoping to have Michelle on a podcast soon. So I'm not going to go much deeper into what she said or what they have to offer there through Springboard for the Arts. But check out their website. I'll link it in the show notes. They've got some toolkits for artists who are building their business. They serve as a fiscal agent. Also, they have sort of like an incubator program. So that might be something that you'd want to look into if you're not near them geographically, just to see kind of how they set it up. And then I'll leave you on her session with people want to live in healthy communities. I found that to be very profound as well. People want to live in healthy communities. And what makes a healthy community? That is where I think that's a fair question for us to ask our leaders, right? Our governmental leaders. So that is a fair question to ask your alderman or your town council or your mayor or your representative. What would make our community healthy? And ask your community too, like what makes them feel healthy. And I bet I am a betting person, and I would bet that every single person listening to this, it works with an organization that somehow contributes to a healthier community. And that's what people want. So I thought that was an interesting perspective. Something I forgot to mention, the reception the night before at Riverview's Art Space, I loved that little reception because it was a chance for all of us presenters to meet each other. And so that was very cool. I met another person who I hope to have on the podcast. Look, I wasn't just out there scoping out potential podcast guests, but I may have come back with a few cool people to introduce you to. And this guy's name is Manuel Cordovez, and he is an intellectual property attorney. And so he was doing a session on IP for creatives. And I did not attend his session because it was during my my prep time for my session. But at this reception the night before, we were talking about an article that he read that like profoundly changed his life. And so I feel compelled to share this information with you. And I don't know where the article is. I'll search for it. If I can find it, I'll link it. But he said it was about askers and guessers. That there are two types of people in the world, askers and guessers. Askers, let me see if I get this right. And if I don't get this right and you know this information better than I do, please let me know and let me give me the opportunity to correct myself in the future. But the way I understand it, askers are people who will ask and then they don't care. They care what the answer is, but you don't hurt their feelings whether you tell them yes or no. They have no sort of emotional investment in the answer. And then the other half of the people are guessers, and they have a lot of emotional attachment to your answer. So you would potentially hurt their feelings if you had to tell them no. The whole point of this, in his mind, was not to like try and figure out who was who. The point was that at least half the world doesn't care what your answer is. So answer in a way that best serves you and maintains your boundaries and your own personal health and wellness. And I thought that was really, that was a cool thought. Like, we get so caught up, I think, especially in something like fundraising, we're embarrassed to ask, or when people are coming to us asking us to do things, where we get tied up in knots about saying no to them because maybe it'll break a boundary that we have, whether maybe it's a time boundary with family, or maybe it's adding something more to your plate that you can't possibly handle. And just keep in mind that you've got a 50-50 chance of not even offending someone anyway. So you might as well give the answer that will best serve you. I loved that so much. So thank you for that, Manuel. All right. So there was the opening session. Then I left to go prepare myself. I like to get really quiet and practice my talk a little bit. And so I did that in the next two sessions. I was kind of getting myself ready. Then there was lunch. Lunch was served. By the way, lunch, oh my God, was amazing. Super healthy food. And they were so aware of food allergies. And I really appreciated that. If you've listened to me for 5 minutes, you know I have celiac. And so there are a lot of times when I just, I don't know, I'm left hungry, and I was not left hungry. So loved the lunch, great program during lunch. And then my session was right after lunch, which I think went pretty well. My session was called How to Make a Splash at Your Next Festival. And it was directly aimed at artists and crafters who would apply to be in the festival that I run. So it was, from my perspective, it was not intended at all to be like a best practices for how to set up your booth or anything like that. It was more about what I, as a producer and a promoter, find important to success. Okay, so I think the two biggest things the two most significant things that I shared with them were to treat a festival like an extension of your marketing plan. So if you have an Etsy shop or some other, or like a brick and mortar store or a gallery where you sell your work, treat the festival like a live event activation. Like you see Verizon and banks and Coca-Cola or whatever other big brands do live events. They'll have a booth set up at a live event, and treat a festival like that, because it just seems like there is just no telling whether or not you're going to sell your work at a festival. Like, you do the best you can in terms of matching your target market with the festival's market and festival attendees. But I mean, if it rains or like anything could happen, or maybe the booth next to you really sucks, and so no one comes walking down your like little area. I don't know. Or maybe the booth next to you is stunning and amazing and no one stops at yours because they're all at the other one. So treat a festival like an extension of your own marketing efforts. That way you can kind of insulate yourself from the fickle nature of the festival attendee crowd, whether or not they're going to spend money with you. And then the other thing I said, which is super quotable, I think super tweetable, is that the opposite of stress isn't calm. The opposite of stress is gratitude. Yeah. The opposite of stress is gratitude. So those were a couple knowledge bombs I dropped. I was really happy to be there. I had a great time. Everyone in my session was so wonderful. They laughed with me. They played along. They were as interactive as I needed them to be without being like overly so. And so it was just so great. So if any of you are listening, thank you so much for being in that session. And then after that session, I went to one on how to find social media influencers. And look, it's a big topic and they only had, 40 minutes. So I'm going to give you probably the biggest piece of knowledge they left us with that day. And that was to just find someone in your target market. Maybe you know them already, and ask them if they'll talk about your thing. So this isn't just for marketing a thing, like this would go for fundraising events, just talking about your organization, especially like think about Giving Tuesday. If you had a few people who really love your organization and whose followers are really great potential donors for you, then just ask them if they'll talk about you. Like you don't have to pay them money. You don't have to give them free stuff. Especially if you're just starting out, just ask them to talk about you. Like, oh, well, that sounds pretty simple. But isn't it like the simplest things that end up like just taking so much time? Deceptively simple. Let's put it that way. And then after that session, I had I had the greatest opportunity. I got to just have a peer-to-peer conversation with Janet Stark from the Virginia Commission for the Arts and the executive director of the Academy Center of the Arts, Jeff Kirshner. And Janet and Jeff and I just basically stood around for almost an hour. I felt like maybe not an hour, but we stood there a long time chatting about our respective organizations and our challenges. And there was a lot of like, yeah, I'm dealing with that too. And your feelings are valid. And Janet, with her statewide view, was able to share with us that, we're not alone, that a lot of other organizations around the state are dealing with similar things. Jeff and I talked specifically about our sort of looming concerns about individual donors and corporate donors, that we don't know where they're going, but it's not to us. And so how can we, first of all, how can we find out where they're going? And also, what can we do to maybe stem the tide, or where can we look for other funding that would fill those gaps? It's a mystery, y'all. It's a mystery. But hey, if I solve it, you'll be the second to know, because the first to know will be my board. But it was really great. That peer-to-peer time is so important. And I know Janet is working on some peer-to-peer sessions for next year's Artworks conference. But it's something that if you can work that, if you're having a conference coming up, peer-to-peer sessions, like if you can have a time where it's just like, hey, all the development directors and all the marketing directors and all the executive directors, y'all each go into a room together or sit around a table and talk amongst yourselves, because we need that Me Too element, and not the hashtag Me Too, but that, yeah, I'm dealing with this too. Or here's how I dealt with that thing. It can be really powerful in a way that sitting and listening to a speaker is not. So I highly recommend it. Peer-to-peer sessions. That's going to be awesome. And then we closed out with a session, which, by the way, I am totally stealing this, called Drinks and Decompression. And Drinks and Decompression was great. It was a great concept, first of all, that we all come back together. There's wine and there's food and there is some entertainment, which, by the way, Nick George is another person you need to watch for. He's a poet, and I'd love to get him on the podcast. So, I've just sort of given you a preview of maybe everyone I can line up for the summer, my summer busy time. But yeah, it was a really nice session. I think probably the only thing I would have done different is I would not have had a speaker who was trying to tell us something important. And he's like, the speaker that they got was someone who is fun, and he started out the session really fun. But the fact is, it was the end of a long day, and some of us had to leave and drive a long distance, and it was just too much for us to all absorb. So drinks and decompression, I think, is a great concept. Maybe don't have a speaker who's trying to like actually convey something that you need to know. Just like really lean into that decompression part of it. So that was it. And then I left to come home, and I had a lovely time. I got to see some people who I've helped in the past. Oh, by the way, shout out Megan Weston. Megan Weston at Riverview's Art Space took my idea of accountability buddies from the VCA conference in 2019 and just ran with it. And that was so cool. Like when I was there for the pre-reception, she's like, "Hey, did you speak at the VCA conference?" I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "You did accountability buddies, right?" I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "This is my accountability buddy right here." And like, we formed a group and everything. That was just so cool. Because you never know if your stuff is actually making an impact until someone tells you like that. And so that was really cool. So Megan, thank you. Thank you for that validation. I appreciated it. All right. Well, this comes to the end of this week's podcast. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Thank you for the work you do in nonprofit. Thank you for, sharing this podcast with someone you think might find it useful or helpful. And again, look, become a Patreon supporter and contact me about executive coaching. Look, I promise to tell you more about what that means in a future episode, but I can barely keep my eyes open right now. So thank you. Leave a review, get in touch, Becky at virtualexecutivedirector.com. If you'd like to join the Executive Director Mastermind for some of that sweet peer-to-peer support, we're on Facebook, and you have to answer the questions. Otherwise, I just automatically deny you, which sounds kind of like a jerk move, but look, I only have so many hours in the day. Just answer the questions. Anyway, thank you so much again for listening. Remember, we shine brighter together.
Follow me down to the river. We can wash our cares away. Don't look back on yesterday. It's only a memory. Follow me.